Hi everyone. We are continuing our reading of Bad Blood. We are in our fifth day. So let's go ahead and get started. Last reading we talked about Jared has finally received the car from Mrs. Anderson, so all the year of hard work that he has done has finally paid off in his eyes. Obviously Mrs. Anderson was not in the right state of mind to give him the car, but she does it anyway, right? Um, but with that, we start to see that Jared starts to feel at least a little bit guilty about the stuff that he's been doing. And we see that when he can't watch Mrs. Anderson water her flowers because she's so shaky. So that obviously shows that he cares at least a little bit about her, right? Or at least feels bad about her state of health. We also see that he's not really sure about anything anymore either, because right here, this sentence states, in truth, I had a weird mix of emotions swirling in my head. So, more evidence that he is maybe not feeling guilty, but still unsure about what he's doing and how things are going. But finally, an example of an admission of guilt would be the very first dream that he has. And I think we talked a little bit about the dream last reading, but I want to get into it a little bit more because I can't remember if we talked about this specific thing. So I showed you a picture of Omar Sharif, his dad, and we've already talked about how Jared is not the idea of what the perfect American family would look like, at least according to Norman Rockwell, right? The famous painter that we've talked about before. And obviously, Jared himself doesn't see that way either, that he would be considered the perfect American family, or at least a part of it, right? Because number one, he's not white, and number two, his family are a bunch of crooks, right? They steal from people. But the very first dream that he has right here, where he talks about driving in the Corvette, going to college, marrying a pretty blonde girl, having a family, this is all evidence that maybe he's starting to change his mind a little bit. Because if you think about it, up until this point, all Jared has talked about, as far as his going for his life, is stealing, just like his great grandfather, his grandfather, and his dad. But now in this dream, we have evidence that maybe he wants something more for himself, right? He wants to go. He had a dream that he wanted to go to school to be a doctor or an astronaut, and he even describes that as something all American, right? And then marrying the pretty blonde girl and having two perfect children and then going on Sunday drives, right? That sounds like the idea of the American dream, the perfect American family, right? All of that. So this is kind of a turning point for him. Some evidence that maybe he's starting to change his mind about things. So we're going to go ahead and continue from here. We're on the next page. The next night I had another Corvette dream. It started out with the blonde girl again, but then it was me at the wheel, and Mr. and Mrs. Anderson were in the back seat. People were gathering for a parade. Firecrackers and fireworks kept going off in loud booms and sharp machine gun like rattles, and then the parade began. It was the 4th of July, and I was driving proudly down the street, wearing a Boy Scout's uniform and saluting all the people, waving and clapping. Except in the crowd, I kept seeing flashes of this ragged looking soldier. He was burned or injured somehow, and he just kept staring at me. From this dream, I woke up with a start. My heart was pounding. The third night, I had a dream that made no sense. I was in this health club, in the weight room with all these bodybuilders. Me, an undersized pencil-necked 16-year-old who couldn't lift one of the massive iron plates they were pumping. I watched them in awe. Me watching would have made yet another Norman Rockwell painting. Then I went up to the biggest guy in a cheerful, totally optimistic voice, said, "Excuse me, sir, I want to change how I look. If I start lifting weights, how long do you think it would take for me to look like you?" The buffalo-necked guy glared down at me, then lifted my neck with one hand and examined my scrawny body. "How long would it take for you to look like me?" "I'd say at least 3 or 4 generations." Everyone in the club laughed wildly. Okay, so let's talk about these next two dreams. The second dream he has about driving in the 4th of July parade in the Corvette. This is a very clear statement of guilt. It may not seem outright, but let's kind of break it down a little bit, okay? So firstly, we're in the Corvette with Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, and we are driving in a parade. There are firecrackers and fireworks going off, and it was the 4th of July. So this is a callback to that letter that Jared found when he opened the glove box to find the title papers to the Corvette. And when Gary wrote that letter to his parents promising he was going to drive them down Main Street on the 4th of July when he came back from war. Now, obviously that didn't happen, and now it seems that Jared has kind of taken his place in the front seat driving his parents down Main Street for the 4th of July parade. We also see him say that he wears a Boy Scout uniform. And this is a callback to the very, very, very beginning of the story when he lies about being a Boy Scout, right? And then finally, he keeps seeing flashes of a ragged-looking soldier. And this is obviously Gary, Mrs. Anderson's son, who passed away from the Vietnam War. So all of this together kind of shows that, Jared might be feeling a little guilty about accepting the car from Mrs. Anderson, especially since we talked about that her state of mind when she was giving him the car was not the best, right? So it was kind of like a nightmare, right? A really bad dream that he had because he feels guilty about what he's doing. Now let's talk about the last dream. And this one is a little bit different, but it has a really big message behind it that I really want to make sure that you guys understand. So Jared is in the gym, talking to some of the big bodybuilder guys, and obviously Jared's described himself as very scrawny, right? He doesn't have any muscles. He's really thin looking, but he decides that he wants to see how long it's going to take for him to look like those guys. And the man said at least 3 or 4 generations. Now that's important because I told you guys before that Jared was the 4th generation of con artists and thieves. So essentially, this man is saying it's going to take 3 to 4 generations for there to be a change, right? Guys, this is literally saying that Jared is the one that's going to change things. He's going to be the one that's going to make a change for the better, right? And that's basically what this is saying. So, this dream, the last dream, was a huge one. Even though it seems like it doesn't make any sense, he's basically saying that this is his opportunity to be the one person in his family that does something good. Makes that change, okay? The next day I felt shaky. Like today was the day. It had to be done. Now or never. Fish or cut bait. I biked out to Mrs. Anderson's right away in the morning. She looked like she'd been wearing the same dress all week. She didn't even get out of her chair when I came in. Gary, she said. No, Jared, I said loudly. She blinked, then her eyes filled with water. I'm sorry, Jared. Don't know what I was thinking. It's okay, I said quickly. I drew up a chair and produced the title sheet to the Corvette. I changed my mind. I'd like to have that car in the hayshed, I said. She stared at me. The one you offered me, I added. That would be fine, she murmured. I don't even drive my Pontiac anymore. You'll have to sign the title page, I said clearly and loudly. Do you understand? Nothing illegal, nothing you can't walk away from. Yes, I understand, she said. I had a pen ready. If one thing had gone wrong so the pen ran dry, I swear I would have bolted. But I didn't. There, she said. Her handwriting was crampy, but legible. And dated, I said. I wanted everything in her handwriting, everything legal. What is the date, she asked. I told her the day and year. She looked up quickly. How is that possible, she murmured. That means Gary is 50. Right there, I said, pointing to the line. Fill in the date right there. My voice was high and faster now. I was sweating. Images of my dream of the 4th of July parade filled my head. Gary on the wall stared down at me. I thought I might throw up. But then it was done. Thank you so much, I said, and touched her bony hand. It was cool, almost cold. I drew back, then hurried toward the door. Jared, she called after me. Gary? Mrs. Anderson croaked only 2 weeks later. I was the one who found her, which I prefer not to talk about, other than that she was on the kitchen floor. Her false teeth had come out, and the place didn't smell so good. I guess I knew she was going to tip over sooner rather than later, so to be honest, it wasn't a surprise. I looked back. I could have taken advantage of the moment and cased the entire house. Maybe she had money under the mattress, but that would have been a mistake. Never get greedy, my father said. It only calls attention to yourself. So I called 911, did all the right things. The yard boy, who had worked for Mrs. Anderson for nearly 2 years, loyal to the end. Even some of the distant neighbors, who I didn't know had been watching, knew of my work for her. Sorry. More than work, a relationship with Mrs. Anderson, as the attorney of the estate described it. He and the neighbors supported me when some long-lost Andersons appeared at the funeral, which I attended along with my mother and father, and then stayed in town for the reading of the will. Okay, so a lot just happened in that last page. In the last two pages, I guess, actually. So we have the three dreams of him kind of feeling guilty, possibly wanting to change the direction his life is going. And then we kind of see Mrs. Anderson start slipping even more, right? So when we first met Mrs. Anderson, she was very skeptical, but allowed Jared to come work for her. And then we start to see her lose herself a little bit when it's Gary's birthday, right? When Jared one of the first times Jared was allowed inside of her house, and he sees that shrine of Gary on her wall in the parlor. So he described her then as sounding a little lost and confused during the conversation. Later that day, he finds the car, and then he talks about how she looks older after only 2 hours. When he actually has the conversation with her about getting the car from her, he kind of describes her as repeating herself over and over again about not being able to drive the Pontiac anymore. And now we have him at her house now trying to get her to sign the papers for him to have the Corvette, right? And it's even more obvious here that she is slipping. So she mistakes him for Gary in the beginning. She has a really hard time remembering what day it is. He even adds that she looks very unhealthy wearing the same dress. Obviously, she hasn't showered in a little while. So Mrs. Anderson's health is going downhill really, really fast. And this is evident because she ends up dying a couple weeks later, right? Which is really, really sad. So Mrs. Anderson passes away, and the neighbors and her attorney support Mrs. Anderson in giving Jared the car because of his relationship with her. And we will talk about that more next class. So if you have any questions or comments or concerns about what we've read today, please email me and we will talk about it. Otherwise, I will see you all on the Zoom call. Thank you.